And welcome to another edition of the Across the Hall podcast. I'm your host, Brendan Harrington, Mr. Harrington, to those of you I teach at Red Jacket. And I am so excited for today's episode because of who I'm bringing on here in just a minute. I first met him back in, I believe it was early 2007, when I was teaching in Asheville, North Carolina. I had a pretty cool side gig, which was doing the play-by-play, radio play-by-play for UNC Asheville men's and women's basketball. One of the other teams in our conference was High Point University, and they had a new play-by-play broadcaster in 2007. And I still remember meeting him for the first time. He's unlike anybody else I've ever met before. And before I bring him on, I want to share with you a story that aired a couple of years ago on CBS This Morning that's going to give you a little bit more information and insight into his background.
Broken back grounder, that'll get a run home.
The baseball team's announcer can be as much a part of its appeal as any player.
Pitch is low, and it's ball four. Bases loaded.
Think of Vin Scully in Los Angeles.
It's time for Dodger baseball.
Or of late legends like Red Barber in Brooklyn.
This is the old redhead, Red Barber.
And Harry Carey at Wrigley Field.
Holy cow!
You are part therapist and part guide and part entertainer.
It's game number 3 of this series, the rubber match.
Which brings us to this season and Jason Benetti, who became the main announcer for the Chicago White Sox. The Sox finished a long way out of first place.
3-2 again.
But up in the booth, Jason Benetti,
in the air, tailing away into right center field,
is one of the best.
Hits it to the wall.
The job isn't just to yell and yammer into a mic about what happens on the field.
Who taught you to switch it?
He makes the rounds before each game, talking to players to tell their stories.
Your first major league game you ever went to?
It was a Pittsburgh Pirates game with my grandparents.
And he preps his own distinct system.
One of the best parts of baseball is that everybody keeps score differently.
For recording each play of the game.
Green is for walks.
It requires a proliferation of pens.
Orange is for strikeouts. I use the purple for pregame notes.
Cross out all the inning numbers on your lineup card.
Yes, now I have.
Jason Benetti's partner in the booth is former pitching great Steve Stone.
I look at somebody who has the intensity of a professional baseball player, the intellect of a nuclear scientist, the abilities that are off the charts.
Ground ball to third. Moncada with the tag, and he got him!
You go back a long way with the White Sox, don't you?
I do. When I was a kid, I came here a lot.
Tell us about an essay you wrote when you were in grade school.
I think essay is a little bit of a stretch. Evidently, I wrote this essay that said what I want to be when I grow up is the White Sox announcer.
It took 27 years, a law degree, and gigs calling college and minor league sports before Benetti joined the White Sox announcers in 2016.
Left field, base hit.
He is an extraordinary human being who has overcome a situation that a lot of people don't overcome. And he's done it by sheer force of will. I have never seen a more determined guy.
James, do you have 60 seconds for me?
I have 59.
But Jason Benetti has overcome, or at least contends with every day, his cerebral palsy.
I was born premature. As my parents tell the story, nearly died, and a doctor helped save me.
Cerebral palsy, or CP, is a disorder that happens when parts of the brain that control muscles are damaged during pregnancy or birth. It can affect muscle coordination for walking, vision, and speech. Jason Benetti has had several surgeries and years of physical therapy.
I think I can see reactions that people give me, where people will smile and talk slowly to me.
People can see Benetti has eyes that wander and a walk he calls funny. He says being so conspicuous just encouraged him to play the tuba in his high school marching band.
If somebody's going to psychoanalyze a little kid who walks with a limp, of course he's going to pick the tuba, the biggest one, because he's got a chip on his shoulder. But part of the requirement of band is that we march. And so we decided that that was not terribly safe.
but he loved being part of the show. Benetti's band director had the idea to put him behind a microphone to call the band's routines. That's how Jason Benetti became an announcer.
They gave me a chance to sit behind a thing that I had no idea that I was going to love.
Tim Anderson drills it to center. Smith back at the warning track. It is up and clanging off and back in.
Is walking a chore sometimes?
It's not. It's actually not. It doesn't look great, but it gets me where I'm going.
Jason Benetti says he's not a disability activist, but he knows his story can be important.
I'm a guy who walks a bit different and whose eyes go in totally different directions of the world.
He shares some everyday moments about CP in a series of cartoons for the Cerebral Palsy Foundation called
Awkward Moments. Do you have 5-year-olds look at you and ask their mother, hey, what's wrong with that man? You don't. I do. Happens all the time. And the mom usually...
And the mom shushes the kid. I've seen that. I've lived it. It's happened to me dozens of times. That in no way teaches the kid what he's or she's looking at by saying, shh, they're trying to make my life better. Yeah. But long range, there's less understanding. So the hope is that there's just more curiosity about what's going on and more openness.
Do you ever dream about doing an interview where we don't have to mention CP?
Here's the thing. I mean, honestly, it's part of me. So many people travel this world and don't know what's unique about them.
How's it going? Good.
I already have one built in.
What do you say we do it again tomorrow? Try and win one tomorrow.
Absolutely.
All right, we'll do that.
And here he is, joining us from Chicago, Jason Benetti. Thanks so much, Jason, for coming on. And we have so much to talk about. I'm so excited about this conversation. But first of all, the question that I'm kind of starting off with everyone during the pandemic, are you staying healthy and sane?
Healthy is a yes. Sane is questionable based on some of the things I've been doing. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's you got to do whatever you can to stay sharp mentally and take care of yourself. But I'm trying to have fun and I'm trying to enjoy life from indoors right now.
So when this all really hit, I mean, it's at the height of busy season for you with college basketball season coming into March. And then, of course, getting ready to ramp up White Sox season. So how was that, just everything coming to a screeching halt? What was that like?
It was crazy because I ended up being in 2 places where there were positive tests. So I had that Sunday, I was with the Bulls. I've been doing some fill-in with the Bulls. And I was doing a game in Brooklyn on Sunday, March 8th. So I did Bulls Nets. I didn't travel with the team. I traveled commercial, and then I went right to Indianapolis to do the semis and finals of the Horizon League basketball tournament. And then we found out later that a women's basketball head coach and an official both tested positive in those arenas. So I came home, and I was told by both the Horizon League about that test and then by the Bulls that I should, just out of precaution's sake, self-quarantine for 14 days. And I ended up, I got a test late in those 14 days because I had something of a cough, but it was basically like late season cough, like you've just been using your voice a lot. But you don't, at that point, like we didn't know what the cough even sounded like if you had COVID-19. So I went and got a test. I was negative. But yeah, it was a wild situation because not only did the brakes squeal, like you said, but I was at home and I was like, do I have this? What's happening? So there were a couple weeks where it was pretty rough.
Yeah, it's my wife Amy was really ill right before all this hit, and she wound up getting tested eventually for it. She tested negative, but by the time she was tested, pretty good chance it could be long gone. She had been diagnosed with pneumonia and influenza A. Wow. We still think there's a pretty good chance that she had it. So the antibody test is going to be big. That's one of the big things that we're waiting to come out. And if you don't remember, she's an OBGYN physician at University of Rochester Medical Center. So
yeah. So I mean, first of all, I hope she's able to work at this point. Like it's
she's
weird.
Fully recovered. Yep.
That's great. I was in when I said able to work, like there are a lot of places where you just can't do like elective procedures and things like that. But I guess she's delivering kids, and we need to have that in the world.
Yeah. But the hospital, like so many hospitals around the country right now, is bleeding money. They just did a story locally in the DNC and on the local media outlets. They're losing like $100 million a month. It's insane because they make so much money off of the elective procedures. And I read something a couple of days ago that on average, a coronavirus patient is going to cost anywhere from like $26,000 to $28,000.
My God.
Yeah. So, unprecedented times, and, we'll look at that through the history lens here in just a little bit. But the place I wanted to go to next, Jason, if I remember correctly, you're an only child, right?
I am. When you get it so right the first time, why go any further, right?
How does 16-year-old, so I teach mostly juniors who are 16, 17 years old. How does 16-year-old Jason Benetti deal with the pandemic?
Yeah, it's crazy that you ask that because first of all, I've not been asked that, and I'm like, it's funny you ask that because I derived some understanding and some catharsis of this current situation from going backward. And like when you and I became friends, I was well beyond being of college age.
Yeah.
And certainly of high school age. But for me, like when I was younger, but before 16 or 17, and I'll get to the actual question you asked. Answer the question. But when I was younger, I had a bunch of surgeries done. And so I would spend some summers in the Rehabilitation Institute in Chicago or in a hospital or some combination thereof. And when I was lamenting like the loss of sports for a month or 2 months or however long it's going to be, I was like, you dolt. Like you've dealt with much worse things in your life, not in terms of lives lost, right? But for me personally, being indoors, like at age 16 or 17, for somebody who wasn't the type of person who was like going to get a fake ID and like go to the dance club in the suburbs, like I don't need to go to Zero Gravity.
You weren't McLovin?
Well, hold that thought for a moment.
I think I know where you're going with this, but go ahead.
But I actually would have been okay, I think, because I played a lot of video games and like that was what I did mostly with my friends anyway. Like I would have been able to go play basketball in my driveway with my hoop. So I would have actually personally been okay in terms of just occupying my time, and I don't think I would have lost much socially. But for people who like had friends, that would be very difficult. I mean, I had friends, but I'm
yeah.
But no, I was on a High Point University bus once, and we were watching Superbad, and they were like, "Hey, McLovin looks like you." So I don't have a Hawaii ID, but I guess I could.
And you have a first name and a last name on your ID.
At this point, yeah.
I love that you're wearing your High Point pullover there.
Yeah, I mean, it's where we became friends. I have like 4 of them in my closet. I don't even understand why they're still here. I mean, I loved High Point, but it's like a lot of High Point gear that I still have.
Oh, the Big South. I loved going to High Point, by the way. I love that little gym. The campus was really nice and expanding all the time. And it gets me thinking too with what's happening now with the economy, how colleges and universities, especially maybe the ones that aren't as old and have the big endowments, how they're going to cope with this all,
Yeah, it concerns me because I had such a great experience at Syracuse, and I met so many people who have been so important to my life. And like, I truly believe that if I didn't go there and didn't meet the people I met, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing right now. Like I would be somewhere sort of floating, or worse. Like the experience I had in college, that people have that experience that opens up their minds and makes them more curious and gets them exposed to people who can really help them understand themselves in the world. The fact that didn't happen for the last month and a half, 2 months for people in your school, for people in college, like I know everybody's doing everything they can to do it online and working so hard and putting together a wonderful bobblehead collection. But I mean, but having those people in your lives is something that's so important. And I hope that we get back to a point relatively soon where people can be around each other again, because I know what it meant for me.
Yeah, and you think of what I've been thinking a lot about. I teach all the juniors, but I have a class of seniors, and obviously I know all the seniors at my school. What a bummer for them. And again, like you said before, putting things in perspective, right? We've had other generations that have dealt with World War II, with the Great Depression, all these different things. But that's a real bummer. I mean, the spring of your senior year, there's some special experiences, not just graduation, right? And I think sometimes we forget as adults, put ourselves back in the mindset of a high school senior. I mean, this is a big deal for them.
Yeah, you kind of get the feeling, I would imagine the kids get the feeling all is lost. And I've had that feeling, pardon me, I've had that feeling before, and it's usually never true. I mean, there are going to be more better experiences down the road, and that's always the hope. But until somebody presents them to you and says, in 2 years, you'll be doing this, we tend to not believe adults when they tell us that. And I get it, because like as a kid, you just haven't seen a lot of the world. And also adults don't ever really know what's coming next. We feel like we do. We have history on our side in terms of understanding it. And we have seen more. But I was that stubborn kid who, when like adults said, well, this is the way to do it, I'd say why. And I love that curiosity. But at this moment, like when adults tell you to have hope, they're not wrong. Hope is a very healing thing. And like, obviously we need science to catch up and we need all of that. But hope is something that you can have even when there's not supposed to be hope. And we're definitely not at that situation yet. Like there's a lot of reason to hope scientifically. And I think it's just going to get better and better in terms of the science and development and all of that. But for those seniors, they're not going to have this experience that we all had. But we have to remember too, that just because they're not having the experience that we had doesn't mean they still can't have a great, vivid experience. It's just going to be different. And that's sad, because they had their sights set on this. But good can come from things that seem like they're rotting.
Yeah. I've seen, and this is awful for all of us, right? I've said it a lot of times. This sucks. It really sucks. But there's definitely been some silver linings. One of those silver linings is right here. I've really found myself reconnecting with people that I haven't talked to in a long time. Neil Solondz, who, of course, was my boss back in the day with the Lakewood Blue Claws in 2002. He reached out. I've reached out to some people. It's a chance for everything to kind of slow down and make those connections. And that's, I don't know about for you, but that's been something that's been nice for me.
Yeah, it's one of those moments where you say, what do I need to do to make myself more fulfilled and understanding of others? And what have I done in the past that I can try to make right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like sometimes when friendships fray, it's just distance or whatever it might be. But there are some things that I've done in terms of just spending time that I say, well, why didn't we do this in the first place?
Yeah.
Like I've got every 2 weeks, I've got a group that plays a trivia night. We have a friend who is a sort of trivia master and does bar trivia, and we're doing it on Zoom. And there's honestly like no reason that we could have done that with people from around the country 3 months ago. And I have a producer friend at ESPN who's put together a bunch of these, not really seminars, but small groups where he'll put on a game on Zoom. And me and other announcers and directors and producers will sit and watch the game and just talk about it and critique it. And we never did that. I mean, there was no feedback, personally or corporate wise, like that just never happened. And it's so easy to do. There are so many things we're doing now that were so easy to do before. And out of desperation, again, comes some level of ingenuity, although it's ingenuity where you say, like, why didn't we do that in the first place?
Yeah. Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about what you're doing on Twitter? You started that pretty early on in the pandemic, and it's pretty awesome.
Yeah. So as I said, like the first 10 days or so, I was kind of a mess, just being honest. Like I didn't really want to be on Twitter. I didn't know if I had it. I didn't know what this was going to look like. You're in that tunnel, and we might still be in a tunnel, but a different tunnel, but you're in that tunnel. And I was like, I don't really feel like being funny at this point. And some may argue that I have never been funny, but I didn't feel like trying at that point. And it was like, what can I do? Like on a daily basis, I'm talking to people on the air and trying to make them smile or enjoy the game or whatever it was. And I thought the saddest part about this is people having to see their family via little boxes on a screen. And, even worse, somebody's sick and dying and you can't be with them. And that just makes me so melancholy. And what I thought was, hey, what if people had things that they wanted to say to their family members that they weren't really able to say themselves because of history or whatever it might be? And so I've asked people on Twitter to send me via direct message just notes to their loved ones, and I've been reading them every night. And for me, it's been an anchor because I know I can be valuable every day. And for the people who've reached out, I hope that there's a smile or there's a, hey, this is cool just for a brief moment. And it makes things a little bit better for an instant. And that's all I can ask for at this point because I'm not a doctor.
Are you at Jason Benetti? Is that your
I am at Jason Benetti. Yeah. And the other thing we've been doing is we have been gathering sportscasters together to reenact scenes from movies.
Oh, I love this.
And musicals. And I have spent some time casting, got Dan Schulman to play Ron Burgundy on Anchorman. Awesome. Len Casper from the Cubs has done Ned Ryerson from Groundhog Day, and he was outstanding. We've delved into musicals in recent days. Did Les Mis and the Conference.
Les Mis was awesome.
It was only good because of Kevin Brown, my former Chiefs broadcast partner in Syracuse, having all sorts of props. Like he had a loaf of bread, he had a knife, like he had a French flag taped to the wall.
Yeah, that was awesome.
Ridiculous.
Yeah, Les Mis, awesome. Obviously, as a history teacher, Les Mis and Hamilton are both great loves of mine. So I'm waiting for Hamilton. If you need anybody to cast, just let me know. I will. A Mean King George, and on an earlier podcast, I actually performed my shot before everything shut down with the Red Jacket high school concert band.
Did you really?
I did.
That's outstanding. It's funny you say that, actually. A friend of mine from college said to me yesterday, he's like, somebody needs to do You'll Be Back. And I was like, dude, it's a one-person thing. It's just like a solo. And he's like, yeah, but it's such a good song. Like, you should find somebody to do that. So it's funny you say that.
I'm going to pause things for a minute here. All right, I know I showed this a couple episodes ago, Jason, but I want to get your reaction to this. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. I'm lifting this right off of my Facebook page here, if I can get it called up.
I'm so excited. Oh, look, it's me.
Yeah, it is you. I got all my cheat sheet up here. All right, here we go. So here's my report. I'll stop it there because we want more Jason Benetti, but I practiced a bunch.
Very good.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I practiced a bunch for it. Thank you.
That is not easy to do. Like, that song is not easy to do. And you were right on with the band, which is the hardest part to me.
Yeah, no, it was definitely hard. Though, it's funny. They have software now that you can get recordings of, and actually they post it on the internet. You can get recordings of like a canned version of the song exactly the way that it was written for the concert band. And so I was using that to help me prepare a little bit.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
What I would suggest to you is that if you ever try to do piano accompaniment on Zoom,
Yeah.
It is not easy to do.
Yeah. No, you guys, you could tell there was a little bit trying to coordinate all three of you, but really cool stuff. So, but yeah, the one I really want to do is King George. You'll be back because, if there's like a school performance, right, you want the teacher, because King George is the antagonist, right? Yeah. So like, I want to be booed at, and then great.
Just like very snarkily take off your crown and play with it. Yeah, I think if they do a school production of Hamilton, you absolutely should be King George.
Yep, and it's not an overwhelming amount to memorize. I think I could handle it. So
yeah.
Have you gotten a chance to see Hamilton?
Yeah. I saw it here in Chicago a couple years ago, and I was one of those people who didn't listen to the album before I went.
I'm sure that was a great experience in and of itself, hearing it for the first time.
It was, and I would do it again. But the one thing that you run into is you just can't follow it all. Like the lyrics are so robust and beautiful that trying to figure out exactly what I was listening to at all times, I immediately went home and listened to the album and wanted to make sure that I heard what I thought I had heard. But I didn't know, when you don't know King George is coming out and you're sitting there the first time and it's this flamboyant, ridiculous, smarmy, sneering character, and the performance was so good, I was floored.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. Lin-Manuel Miranda is so amazingly talented. Yeah. I show my kids a PBS documentary that they did where, and I don't remember the guy's name, he runs the New York Public Theater, and he compared him to Shakespeare. He said he's a modern day Shakespeare. Instead of doing it in iambic pentameter, he's doing it in hip hop. And he's amazing.
His vocabulary and the way he manipulates words is something I will go however long my life is trying to do and not be able to do.
He spent 2 years writing My Shot and actually worked on it in Burr's actual bedroom. They let him go in there, and that was in that documentary too.
Is that right?
Oh, it's a great, I'll have to send you a link. It's the PBS Hamilton's America, it's called. Really, really good. All right, so we got a sneak peek before. I'm going to go back to sharing my screens. You get an inside peek, Jason, as to how I teach classes now.
I love it.
Sometimes results in me stumbling around trying to get to the right thing and all my students giggling. So
nice.
Let me hear, which is what's happening. There we go. All right, we're going to say goodbye to Facebook. And Jason, I'm going to go ahead and, if it's okay with you, I'm going to go ahead and play the awkward moments. I'm going to go to the first one. Well, you see, I'm stumbling around already here.
Oh, it's all right.
Got my
more me.
Hold on a second.
As Rick Sutcliffe told me the first time I worked with him at ESPN, he said, "Less of you means more of me." I was like, "Thanks, Rick. Appreciate it."
All right, I finally figured stuff out here. This really is how some of my A-push classes go sometimes. All right, so we're going to take a look at this. This is what you've done with the Cerebral Palsy Foundation with these spots. It's called Awkward Moments.
Hi, I'm Jason Benetti, your friendly Chicago TV sports announcer with Awkward Moments. Brought to you by the Cerebral Palsy Foundation. Hey, you like movies? I like movies. You like popcorn? I like popcorn. While you're ordering your popcorn, do you have 5-year-olds look at you and ask their mother, "Hey, what's wrong with that man?" You don't. I do. Happens all the time. And the mom usually looks at the kid like he's just violated 19 rules of good citizenship and sprouted horns. But the thing is, it's okay. It's cool for a kid to try to figure this out. Look, I'm a guy who walks a bit different and whose eyes go in totally different directions. I have the world's best peripheral vision. And there may be another guy a few spaces down who's in a wheelchair. And if the line was long enough, there'd also be somebody with a cane and dark glasses. And someone who's simply standing there, but you've just got this feeling he needs, I don't know, a hug or a big furry blanket or something. You know, I actually love the disability blurt out, because if kids don't ask, they don't get a good answer. And if they do ask, they can find out that CP is damage to the brain and not damage to the spirit or the soul. Hey moms, it's fine. Dads, it's fine. Aunts, uncles, caregivers, it's fine. I have CP. It's part of who I am. I like who I am. In fact, do you like who I am? Because if you don't, I might need that big furry blanket. Just kidding. Oh, that actually feels really good.
So I'm going to back out of it now. First of all, that's so well done, Jason. Great job on the people who put that together. I know you've talked about how maybe earlier in your life you were shied away a little bit about, that defining who you were or wanting to be something you talked about a lot. But it certainly seems, we saw this in the piece that I showed on CBS this morning, you've come to embrace that and kind of, do good work with it. So just kind of talk a little bit about that journey that you've gone through in terms of that.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked, Brendan, because the major headline here is the thing that you think as a kid, it defines you in a way that people are going to poke fun at or hate you for or not want to be friends with you for. When you're an adult, it's the thing that makes you unique.
Yeah.
And that's not the case for literally everybody in the world, because there are some places where like they actually discriminate against you, like outwardly with laws and things like that, right? But in this country, it's very, very important for people who are dealing with something to know that they are okay. And the thing that makes them seem uncool or whatever, right, is the thing that will make them unique to people when they grow up. And it's very hard to know. And if somebody would have told me back then, I probably would have gotten mad. But the thing that I've realized is that I stand out in a crowd, and that's okay at this point. And I used to hate when people would ask me if I need help, or ask me if I need a cart ride in the airport, or ask me, why my shoes are torn up because of how I walk, things like that. And it was frustrating to a point, and it certainly came along with my success in the career. But there was also a time where I was like, you know what, I'm just going to get reactions from people, and I have to learn to deal with it, because I'm not going to be able to change their perception because they're seeing something different. Like, far be it for me to be frustrated with somebody who sees something different. If you were driving down, the throughway, and one day you got in the car and all of the exit signs were pink instead of green, you'd be like, wow, that's weird. And the pink signs, if they could talk, would be like, who you calling weird, bozo? But you'd say it because it'd be different. Like, that's the thing. We as humans perceive things, and we put them in a structure, and like we have a schema for them. And then if they change, like if red lights were green lights, we'd be like, what is going on right now? And then everybody would crash into each other. Like, of course I'm going to, as I walk up to somebody, it's just not going to compute, because there aren't very many of me who walk like that and also communicate like I do. And then there are some people who are in a wheelchair and communicate well, and some people who aren't in a wheelchair but don't communicate well. And we all are individual people. But for somebody who's rushing for a flight, I'm just a person in the way, right? Like, everybody's fed up. So it's not like every person you encounter is going to ask you 1,500 questions about yourself. So you kind of just have to get used to the idea that you're going to get different reactions. But then you take it a step further and you say, wow, I might kind of just be a guy if not for this. And that's not to say, like, don't get good at what you do, because the only reason my career exists is because I had to say, hey, look, I'm not going to walk through the door and wow people. Like, I'm not going to be the guy who shoots a 65 at the golf outing and people are going to say, wow, he's the cool kid, I want him on my TV screen. Like, that's not going to happen. So I had to dive into the work. And so what I would say is, for anybody who's frustrated with how they're being perceived, number one, it's probably not going to change. People are going to see it, the way you deal with it and handle it and treat people, even when they're being frustrating or annoying or even rude. Like, that's the thing you can change. And then the other thing is, find something you love to do and go do it. And if you dive into that and use the frustration that comes from the way you're being perceived to dive into the work, you'll at least get a fulfilling feeling from the idea that you made something really good out of your heart and your mind.
Yeah, it's so hard, even as a teacher who's around high school kids every day, remembering and thinking back to what it was like to be a high school student can be really hard. I think about my career, right? Like, I get in front of students. I'm to the point where there's nothing I can really do that's going to embarrass me that much, right? Like, I mean, sometimes a little piece of spittle will come out. I'm like, yeah, it is what it is, right? Whereas if that had happened in, when I was a student, you're just like, oh my God. So it's interesting to think back. And I wanted to ask you, what was high school like for you, thinking back to just your experience overall, not necessarily related to the pandemic now, but just what was high school like for you?
Yeah, it was interesting because it was the place where like I figured out in some way that I didn't know much about anything. And then I also figured out what I wanted to do for a living. When I first got to high school, it was just this overwhelming fee. I was as an only child, like I didn't have any brothers or sisters to be like, oh, do I go to E-building? Do I do this? And my dad had gone to the high school, but it's not like we had long conversations about like what high school was like nowadays. So you go there and you hear like rumors and discussion about what teacher is cool and what teacher's not. And then there are like seniors sitting outside like smoking, and I'm like, why are they smoking? Like what's happening? This is ridiculous. Like, are we adults now? Like, also, I don't think it's cool to smoke. So why are they all doing it? Like, what's happening? And you spend the first month just trying to figure out where you are on campus. We had 2 buildings. It was a fairly large high school.
Large public high school?
Large public high school, yeah. And
suburban Chicago?
South suburban Chicago, Homewood Flossmoor High School. We had 2 buildings, so there was a path that you walked on to get to the other building. And so I took classes that I knew and, kind of took the path. But 2 things happened for me that were huge in high school, just based on like electives and assorted things that you can. Sorry, I have my window slightly open.
No, it's fine. Giving us the city feel. I love it. Is that like a skyscraper in the background there?
Yeah, it's a Zoom background. No, it's
a Zoom. I was like, man, you're right in downtown.
This is actually downtown Chicago. It is. It is. No joke.
Oh, it is. Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, I was kidding about the Zoom, but this is actually.
Oh, okay. I was like, man, that looks good.
Oh, yeah. So I get to look outside. But I was in band. I played the tuba in junior high school, and I got to play it in concert band. But also one of the things that I did, and I think this was in the piece, is I was supposed to play the sousaphone, and I got behind a microphone. So like that helped me figure out what I wanted to do. But there was a high school radio station at Homewood Flossmoor High School, and so that was the place that I went after school and just made a ton of friends that did that. Like not a ton, like 10 to 15 people that were united to go make good media, right? So I got to do play-by-play, and I got to do sports talk, and I got to work with a bunch of people that I didn't know before, and that put me on my path to do what I'm doing. Had the high school radio station not been there, I definitely would not have been doing this.
When did you really develop the golden voice? So obviously it's post-puberty, because part of what makes your voice great is that it's deep and rich. But was that something right away where it came natural to you in terms of that really, really solid voice?
I don't think so. People who knew me then were like, oh, we always knew that you. But if you play tapes from then, it's like, ugh, this is awful. What are you doing? And honestly, I didn't learn I may have had like some talent to do this, like talent.
Yeah.
But I didn't learn to use my voice until I would say about 2010. I had gotten advice from the guy who does radio for the Dallas Mavericks, and I still have never met him in person. But I was doing High Point basketball, and I sent him a tape of High Point against VMI. And I sent this to him, and he wrote me back. Again, I didn't know the guy. He wrote me back, basically, what you're saying is good. How you're saying it is boring and flat. Like, that's basically what he said to me. And I was like, well, you're a jerk. I don't like you very much. Thank you for the advice. And I listened back to it, and I'm like, man, this is really monotone. He was the first person to kind of shove me in the direction of understanding that my voice is an instrument. It can be musical in nature, and the way you use it is what you get out of it. And so I think probably around 2010, I started to really realize that there was stuff you can do with your voice to push the limits of it, rather than just say, well, here's my voice and this is what it is. I'm never changing it because I don't want to sound like a broadcaster. Like, you can hit highs and lows. You can be sharp and flat in the way you deliver a call, just like playing music.
Yeah, that was one of the things that I think all broadcasters kind of learn is it's not a matter of volume necessarily, but using intonation to express what's happening and the degree of importance and excitement, et cetera. The other thing that's kind of interesting, I'm fascinated by accents. So you have a very, a neutral voice.
Non-regional dialect, as they call it in Anchorman.
Yes, there you go, exactly. I had to work and still sometimes find myself, from a broadcasting standpoint, trying to cushion the upstate, nasally Western New York accent with jackets and all that. So, did you have much of a Chicago accent, or is it just curious your perspective?
Yeah, I would wager that I sandpapered it out.
Yeah.
In part, my family, my parents and my extended family were very much like, hey, Bulls, Bears, Blackhawks, White Sox, that Chicago sort of thing. And so I kind of rebelled against it because I just had it around so much. But I also, it's funny you say that. I like doing impersonations. I like figuring out where my voice has to go for other people. And mine are all obscure broadcastery impersonations. But I like figuring out how to make other sounds. And I think that helps me not make them when I'm trying to just be me.
Yeah. You know what I think has helped me a little bit too in terms of neutralizing the upstate New York accent? Well, I lived in the South for 10 years. That's one thing.
But you might could have lived in the South. Might could.
Yeah. I reckon down around the holler I could. I could tell you some great stories. I taught for 3 years in Yancey County, North Carolina, Burnsville.
Okay.
Burnsville. And I was the youngest guy in the faculty there, and all these older guys with thick mountain accents. And oh man, there were some miscommunications a few times.
I would imagine so.
Also, I remember at one point there was a student. I was like, "Well, where's Charlie?" They're like, "He's laying out." I'm like, "Is he tanning?" It's like the sun's not even out. I guess in Western North Carolina, laying out a class means to cut class, to ditch class. I'd never heard that before. Yeah,
interesting. What I learned from North Carolina especially was about giving directions. In North Carolina, it seemed, at least in Winston-Salem, you didn't use streets. You used landmarks. People would be like, turn left at the second florist, and then right at the cookout, and then you're going to see 3 rocks. Do not turn at the rocks. Turn at the McDonald's after the rocks. And I was like, do we not have streets? What is happening here?
Now, what's interesting is Union and Confederacy during the Civil War, right? It was the Confederacy that named stuff after the town, which would make sense, right? Like the Battle of Sharpsburg. But then the Union kept naming stuff after geographical entities like Antietam, right? Or Bull Run instead of Manassas. So it's kind of the opposite there.
It's the very opposite, yeah.
And just one more thing on accents. The other thing I learned in the South, the emphasis on words. One of them, I like to ask the question. So Jason, what do you call the holiday where you eat all the turkey?
Oh, you're going to tell me it's Thanksgiving, but it's Thanksgiving.
Well, yes, in the South, they're going to tell us it's Thanksgiving. They put the emphasis on thanks.
I'm so glad you said this because I was at the ESPN basketball seminar and I was talking to Chris Budden, sideline reporter. She's amazing, wonderful person.
Yep.
And she was talking about a claim she had put in or somebody had put in on her car. And she said, insurance.
Yes, that's another one.
I was like, no.
Insurance. Yes. And it's Thanksgiving.
Insurance. No, you can't.
And then there's the obvious one, people outside the South will use a y'all once in a while, but in the South, all y'all to emphasize the plural.
Yeah. It's like the broadcasters who say left to go, 3 minutes left to go. Well, that's the same. And all y'all, that's more than y'all somehow. And I love like I would hate a world that had no accents, because how dare we knock out people's accents, and they're funny and they're fun to play with, and like
they're great.
But it also is culture shock. Like when I first went down to North Carolina, I was like, oh boy, whoa, what have I gotten myself into? And then you realize they're just people who talk differently.
Yeah. Well, one of the things, I'm fascinated by this whole aspect, and I have a book back on my shelf here. Oh, it's not on my shelf. It's around here somewhere. Oh, hold on one second. I'm going to grab it real quick. I brought, the last day of school, I brought a whole bunch of stuff home because I knew I might need it.
Nice.
So, also, you'll appreciate this as a broadcaster, Jason. I've invested in a lapel mic for Zoom, so I don't sound like
you unhook yourself. That was amazing.
Yeah. So this book, it's called Albion Seeds.
Okay.
And for APUSH students, we're getting ready to take the AP exam on Friday. We're 6 days away. So this is good review for my AP class, Jason. I appreciate you helping out.
Nice.
Basically, the thesis of this book is all about how 4 different groups of people from England basically settled and established 4 different, he calls them colonial folkways, 4 British folkways in America.
Okay.
And so, for example, the Puritans in New England, those who settled the Chesapeake, who were younger dudes who weren't the oldest born, so they weren't inheriting everything. So they're trying to make some money with tobacco. And then the Scots-Irish is my personal favorite. These were people who had been forced out of Scotland and then Northern Ireland. They just hate all authority, so they go settle on the frontier.
Yep.
We have a whole bunch of presidents who have Scots-Irish ancestry. But you can trace a lot of stuff all the way back to colonial times. Albion Seed, which was the name, I think the Greeks called England Albion.
Oh, is that right?
And that's why the book is called, I think it's the Greeks. That's why the book is called Albion Seed, because it's England Seed.
That book reminds me of a book that a friend of mine recommended to me called American Nations by Colin Woodard, which is an even smaller subset. It's a group of 11 even tinier factions who helped build the controversies and the battles that we still have today. I mean, there's something cathartic in reading something like that, like you're describing, because you realize that the fractious nature we have sometimes in current events isn't new.
Yeah.
We've had those battles among peoples before in this country. They're just a little louder right now.
Yeah, definitely. I talk about it with kids all the time. I love the line of history may not necessarily repeat itself, but it often rhymes.
Yes. Yes.
Here's a weird thing for you. The week that we went out of school, my AP class, we were studying World War I, and one of our topics was the Spanish flu pandemic of 1918.
Oh my God.
Talk about being able to make connections, right?
Yeah. I mean,
unbelievable.
It's wild. And when we're seeing some of the pitfalls again in the same way. So please, everybody, read books.
Oh yeah, definitely. I did just double check here. It was in the footnote, so I had to look extra careful here. Albion was the first recorded name for the island of Britain, which was known to the Greeks in the 6th century BC as the island of Albionus. So there you go.
How about that?
Dropping some knowledge on you. So, it's always interesting. You have a game plan for where you're going to go with a conversation, but as often happened with us back in the day on the Bren Zone, when you were the special counsel to the Bren Zone.
We veer.
We do. And that's what's so great about the podcast as a platform, right? The fact that you can have these long conversations. With that said, teachers, we're wrapping up Teacher Appreciation Week. Whether it was in high school, earlier, Syracuse, when you went to law school at Wake Forest, were there some teachers, I'm sure there were along the way, that made a big impact on you?
Yeah, let's do the lightning round of why teachers are important, because I have a couple of them, and I think they're very worthy stories. We'll start at Wake Forest Law School, and you remember the H1N1 situation? Yeah. We had swine flu going around, and I had missed the first 2 weeks of the semester because I was doing the Syracuse Chiefs season. So I would do class remotely for a little while, and then class work remotely. I didn't Zoom into classes.
Yeah.
We didn't really have Zoom at that point. But I missed the first week and a half, 2 weeks, whatever. So my absences were all taken up already. I had an employment law professor who, thank goodness she existed, because you can't just always get away with everything. Like, they were very flexible with me, but I came back, I had missed 4 classes, and that was her maximum, and I got H1N1. I had swine flu. And I was like, hey, the university just put out a recommendation that we not come to school if you have H1N1. So I wrote her, and she was like, that's fine. You still have to write a 10-page paper in order to get whatever grade you earn in this class. And I was like, that's ridiculous. I have swine flu. And she was like, it's also ridiculous that you already used up all your absences in the first 2 weeks of class. So like having that, and like, I could have been right to some people, but I actually appreciate that she held the line on that, because you can't just like put yourself completely on the margin and then say, oh, this bad thing happened. Like, that's my fault for putting myself on the margin there. It absolutely is. And it sounds stern and ridiculous, but I'm glad she did it. At Syracuse, I had a professor named John Nicholson who I met. We had these classrooms that had a table in the middle and computers on the outside. And so we could go into somebody's classroom while they were having class and work on the computers if we were doing like our newsroom class. So those computers were free for us to use, even though somebody else was having a class. And this guy was going on a rampage about the student radio station WAER, where I was actually just named the sports director. And he was talking about how ridiculous it was that we used false present tense in the mornings on sportscasts and things like that. And the class just started laughing a little bit. And he was like, why are you laughing? And they pointed to me. And I was like, hi, I'm the new sports director. And he's a brash guy, and he's a thoughtful guy, and he didn't get off his stance. Like, we had a discussion about it.
Yeah.
And he's one of my closest friends in the world. And then the teacher at HF who put me behind the microphone instead of in the marching band with a tuba.
Yeah.
Without those people, there's somebody at every juncture in life who's a teacher or somebody who's a guide, even if you're older, that can really help you understand that the worst thing that can happen is aiming at a lower target than you need to. Yeah. A lot of people get criticism and they say, well, that's too harsh, or I don't like that criticism, or that's not fair. People are literally just trying to tell you how to be better at the thing you're doing. And it hits you in the heart, and so it's hard to take. But the people who push you to reach higher instead of just say, hey, you did a good job. Like, everybody needs to hear you did a good job. But I, at this point in my life and a couple years before this, probably like for the last 10 years or so, I have wanted people around who say, that's not good enough, do better.
Yeah. You know, one of the things I tell my students a lot, and this comes from somebody who was kind of a mentor to me, wasn't an official teacher, but a Washington Lee alumnus named Doug Chase, who kind of took me under his wing to teach me the art of play-by-play. But when I was making the transition to teaching, he says, you know, one of the hardest things when you are a teacher and when you are a student in that relationship is keeping separate. You know, this is a judgment and evaluation of your product for this particular course.
Yes.
Your performance in U.S. history, your, video package in journalism, not a judgment of you, Jason Benetti, as a human being. And it's really hard, especially when you're talking about 15, 16, 17-year-olds.
Especially if the only thing you've ever had is being called smart, right? So if the thing that you have is that you get straight A's and you get a B, then your identity's gone.
Yeah.
And it's not about that, because that B could be the best thing that's happened to you. The thing that's hard is when you try to explain to people, all I want is for you to do it better next time. Like, I hate to say this, but when I was teaching as an adjunct, I wanted to say to students, and I never could, don't worry about this grade this time. If you do it better next time, you're gonna get a better grade. Like, this is just an indicator of where you are right now. And if you change this thing next time, it's going to improve. I mean, you have control over the product you put forth into the world. And when those defenses go up, it's sort of like politics. You start to have fighting over things that aren't actually the pith, the substance of the issue.
Yeah. Jason, how are we doing on time?
We're good. Yeah, I got about 10 minutes or so.
Okay, awesome. U.S. history. Did you take AP U.S. history in high school? Do you remember?
I did not. I took.
That's okay.
I took a couple AP classes. I did not take AP US.
Because we're getting ready for the AP exam next week, which they're taking them from home, which is a story in and of itself. They're 45-minute exams this year instead of the normal 3.5 hours.
45 minutes.
One question, DBQ, document-based question. So we're getting ready for that in my AP class. But who are some of your favorite figures from American history? I was curious.
Favorite figures from American history. Number one, and it's not close, is Louis Brandeis.
Yeah.
The Supreme Court Justice.
Supreme Court Justice, yes.
Yeah. So in law school, one of our classes was this great jurists seminar, and the whole class was, you read the seminal biography about one of the justices, and then you read every single one of their opinions, concurring, dissent, majority opinion, whatever it might be. So I've read all of Brandeis's cases, and what he did, like if you look up his writings on the curse of bigness and things getting too large because then they get toxic and having to break up things that are too large, there is some fantastically useful information. And he was not even close to a socialist. He was just somebody who knows that power can rot. And so I loved what he did in that realm, but also a thing that Brandeis did when he first moved to DC, he was not terribly aware of everybody in DC. He wasn't a politico sort of guy. So he had this deal where he and his wife would host dinner parties, and the people who came got a free dinner. But the only payment was Brandeis got to ask you as many questions as possible about the thing you do. So he didn't have the person in charge of the Audubon Society show up, and he just pepper the person with bird questions all night long. And that's how he got his base of information about everything going on in DC. He had these dinner parties.
That's fantastic. Yeah. I love, that was actually further down on my list, and we probably won't have time to get to it, but because of your law school connection, I love talking about school law cases with the kids. Cases like, obviously, Tinker versus Des Moines, Bethel School District versus Fraser is my favorite because that will get giggles. That's the, I don't know if you remember the school assembly where one student refers to the sexual prowess of another student.
Yes, absolutely.
So if we do this again, I have some hypothetical school law questions.
I was peeling back the curtain. There's an email that's supposed to come through when the thing that is supposed to happen at the top of the hour is going to happen, and I don't have it yet. So let's do it.
Okay, so let me share this with you while we're talking about it, because I thought you would appreciate this. So I just mentioned Tinker versus Des Moines at the New York State Social Studies Conference. Whoops, there's my U.S. history bracket. That's for another time.
Nice.
Where'd we go here? There we go. Oh,
where do I get one of these? Help see people and share the messages that make the world a little.
All right, I think I have once again settled things down a little bit. Well, here's the picture I wanted to show you. You know who that is?
I know it's you.
John and Mary Beth Tinker.
Wow, the Tinkers. They're not wearing armbands.
Yeah, I know. 50-year anniversary of Tinker versus Des Moines, and that was last year. They were the keynote speakers at the State Social Studies Conference.
Wow.
And I got a chance to meet them. All right. All right. I just found the picture. So we're going to go back to screen share here. And so I was literally sitting in the front row because I was so excited. And you can see there, I'm holding up the picture of them with the armbands that you just mentioned.
Nice.
Zooming in and out. And there they are 50 years later, right?
That's awesome.
So how cool is that, right? The Tinkers.
That's fantastic. When you meet somebody like that would excite me more than meeting an athlete, because it's more random and they're less in your face, which means that they have, number one, what they did for society is obviously exaltable. And then number two, you just don't hear about them nearly enough. So I'd have so many questions for them about what happened and why they were the ones and what this whole thing has been like. Is you accidentally then dedicate your life to this whole thing that you just did when you were a kid.
Yeah, one of the things that I learned from them that I didn't realize was that the school board had purposely and specifically put something into the dress code about the armbands in an attempt to basically make it a thing. Yeah. So I didn't realize that. I thought it was just something that had already existed. But so anyway, so this whole conversation, so the students love to talk about this kind of stuff of how does your First Amendment right, how do your First Amendment rights apply, right? The famous line from that case, which is you don't shed your rights at the schoolhouse gate. Right. And then Bethel School District versus Fraser kind of puts a limit on that, right? Like the school still has not just a substantial disruption, but also like the school has some say in preventing obscene language being used at the school. So in today's political era, this fascinates me. So in the election in 2016, we had some students who wore Hillary for prison shirts. Okay. And some of the teachers thought that the students should have to take those off. I was not one of those teachers. I felt as though that was political speech. And I'm just curious what your interpretation of that would be. Would a principal, let's say this got challenged through the court system, would a principal have the authority to tell those students to take a Hillary for prison shirt off?
I don't know at this point. I mean, again, like the law is this living, breathing instrument is what they talk about all the time. And I think under current law, the answer would be no, they wouldn't, unless it was inciting in some way and unreasonably disruptive to the day. But then at some point,
which is the Tinker precedent.
Right. It's no longer about the shirts, though. It's about the acts that are coming from the shirts. And so I think it would depend on the circumstances surrounding the actions that stem from the shirts and how tenuous the connection is from the shirts to the actions themselves. But I think the shirts on the face would be fine.
All right. So now let's go a year later or 2 years later. Student wears a shirt that says Trump border wall, build company, build the wall 10 feet higher. Same scenario.
Yeah, I don't think that changes. I think it's well, how political of speech is it at that point? Like it's not about a campaign at that point. It's about the president. And is it, again, what does it cause? I don't know.
Now, if we go the substantial disruption route, so what if you have just one student who wears that, and our school district is, predominantly white, but let's say it's a school district that has a significant Hispanic population, and you have 15 to 20 white students who all wear this shirt on the same day. Now, do we get into the substantial disruption territory?
Yeah, and I know intent is not a major factor here, but then it starts to look a lot more like a targeted action rather than just a shirt. And so I think, we move closer, but I think it also depends on where you are in terms of how much coverage it gets. Like, would it end up at the Supreme Court, that sort of thing. So practically, I think once you put that in, then it starts to look a lot more like a targeted action, and it starts to look like hate speech. And I would say no.
Yeah, but it's and the students get very, very interested. When you make it about them, obviously.
Well, and rightfully individual rights. I mean, that's what the world needs, is people interested in this, but also interested in the cases that came before it, and understanding that maybe we've been here before, and maybe there's something to read that suggests that this situation has happened before. And whenever somebody says it's unprecedented without researching the precedent, they're just wrong on the face.
Yeah. Combining our conversation about voice and about history, who do you think has the best voice of any historical figures? Because I have a couple that I really, really admire.
Best voice of historical figures.
obviously in the era of video and audio recordings.
Right. So, like, oddly enough, I think about, I mean, first of all, the Obama speech at the Democratic National Convention that thrust him onto the map.
2004. Yeah.
Standing. Yeah. His cadence and his tone are something that so many people have tried to follow. But I actually, oddly enough, I think it's not a deep, great voice, but I just think in terms of being iconic, I think John F. Kennedy has a really iconic, notable cadence and tone and something that always is his. And so it's not like you're necessarily looking for the deep, gravelly, booming deal. But I think Kennedy, you turn on Kennedy for 1 second, and that's Kennedy.
Yeah, no, definitely. My pick is Winston Churchill.
That's a mistake by me. The Churchill war rooms in London, listening to his speeches.
Oh my God!
It's
we will fight in the hills and in the streets. We will never surrender. And FDR too. There's something about, and I don't know if it's just nostalgia for that whole era that I have. I'm watching Ken Burns' The Roosevelts right now.
Yeah.
Really, really good. The episode, I think it's episode 4 when FDR gets polio.
Okay.
You need to see it. It's amazing.
Really? I have been asked by a baseball scout in a press box if I had polio.
There's evidence, and I've talked about this with my students. There is some evidence that FDR may not have had polio. He may have, in fact, had Guillain-Barré syndrome.
Really?
Because it fits with that as well. And, of course, that polio tends to strike kids.
Yeah.
But the way that polio changed him, and I didn't realize Warm Springs. I always knew Warm Springs was a place he went to for himself to feel rejuvenated. But he turned that into a whole polio. There was no real treatment or any kind of organized way of treating kids with polio. And the way he brought kids from all over the country and people in, and he was kind of a selfish person before that.
Yeah.
He was an only child whose mother just doted on him. And it completely changed him. If he doesn't get polio, he doesn't become the man that he becomes. And
that goes for, I think, honestly, like talking to parents of kids with disabilities, I think that happens to a lot of parents. They're in the rat race and they're running and they're doing everything they do, and then they have a kid with a disability, and then there's a level of empathy that I've been told by those parents when I've talked to them that just starts to exist that was never there before.
And he was like Theodore. He was a great athlete and he could do whatever he wanted. He was good looking, and then all of a sudden you lose all of that, right? And it took him a little while. He spent a lot of time in seclusion and worked really hard to, kind of come back and have the political career he did after that. But, and then the whole aspect of him, hiding from a large extent, the disability.
Right.
Is fascinating. So yeah, Ken Burns' The Roosevelt's really, really good.
I'll check it out.
Real quick here on a couple things, as I know we're past 4:00 right now. How are we doing? You still doing okay?
Yeah, I probably got about 5 more minutes.
All right, 5 more minutes. All right. So when we used to do the Bren Zone back in the day, when things got crazy with political and world events, we would chat about them. But I just kind of wrote everything out here, the whole what if I told you that, when we were talking back in, I guess this would have been 2011, 2012, you were at the Chiefs, that in 2020, you would be the voice of the Chicago White Sox on television, not radio, right? And obviously have the big career that you have. We're in the midst of a pandemic that has nearly taken 80,000 American lives and sent unemployment to 15%. Only the Great Depression is higher. Murder hornets are ravaging the West Coast. Not really, but it sounds worse when I say so.
Right.
Murder hornets, right?
Murder hornets.
It's snowing sideways outside right now in upstate New York on May 9th. We lost Kobe Bryant, and we have a former reality TV star who suggested that people should inject themselves with disinfectant, running against somebody who's almost 80 years old, and Joe Biden. And I think that about covers it, right?
Yeah, and that's just 4 months of this.
Absurd.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm trying to think of which is the least likely. Like, I'm trying to rank in my head, if you told me all those things were going to happen, what was the least likely. And I actually think we were sort of careening toward reality TV star as president.
Yeah.
I think, like, we revere people who are pop culture idols, and whether that's right or wrong, I think that has happened, and was happening before Trump. He just sort of seized the moment. It's all very odd, but then again, like, I step back from it and I say, we're all still living. That I can hear this, obviously. We've lost 80,000 people. Like, that is a ton of people. That is, like, that should never just be a number.
Yeah.
Because when 9/11 happened, what was the death toll on 9/11? You remember? I remember.
It was about 3,000 all total when you added up the crash victims and the three different sites. Yeah.
I honestly think that for anybody watching this in your class that wants to go into politics, it shows that the allure, and this is why I love Brandeis, the allure of power marshaled in war is somehow really substantial for people when they want to grab at it. Like, 9/11 obviously was an attack on our country, and to not retaliate would have been delinquent as well, right? Like, the actions needed to be taken. 80,000 people have died in America. And we have not seen the federal response that we saw from a guy in George W. Bush, whose approval rating immediately after 9/11 was in the 90s.
Yeah.
This is not a Republican issue.
Yeah.
This is not Republicans are bad when people say this has gone wrong. Again, you said it earlier. When somebody says to you in a classroom setting, this is not personal, this is about what you produced in this situation. This is not personal, but 80,000 people have died. And we can do better than that as a society. Like, that doesn't have to be personal. You can lay those facts out on the table and say, look, this is unacceptable. We need to work at it. And there are some great people in science and great people in local politics who are working at it, but we don't see that unified togetherness of a federal government that we have typically seen in circumstances like this. And again, it does not have to be a criticism of a person. The response has just been one that has left 80,000 people dead as we're talking. You can say that without it being a personal attack. And that's necessary for us to have the checks and balances that we have.
I think if what the United States accounts for 4% of the world's population, yet we have, I can't remember what the latest percentage is. It's much higher than that.
Yeah, it's tough to watch. But again, like, I would save the personal attacks for a situation where they're, like, they're going to inflame less. Like, everybody knows what they want to say, but the best way to get action is to say, look, we just have to do better. Like, we just have to do better. That's what you tell your students. That's what I told my students. That's what our parents tell us. Like, we just have to do better. And other countries have done better. And it's disappointing. But again, like, I believe in both the American and the human spirit. And I know that there are so many good, smart people working on the science of this every day, that's where my hope comes from.
Me too. And we've had some positive developments on the vaccine front already and the treatment front. So, man, I hope that those developments keep happening, because I miss baseball, man. I miss sports. I miss a lot of things.
I miss being in a middle seat. And I never thought I was going to say that. Like, put me on a middle seat from Minneapolis to Phoenix right now, and I'll be a big.
There you go.
What?
There you go. So just real quick before we wrap up, I got my Ravenclaw sweatshirt on. You have your High Point shirt. So,
Yeah.
So don't know how much you're into Harry Potter, but I'm a Ravenclaw.
Okay.
But then this is what I'm really excited about.
Wow. Okay. So, all right.
I use the West Wing in my government teaching a lot. So my seniors know West Wing really well.
You got to hold on 1 second, okay?
Sure.
Hold on. Sing
All right.
for the kids or something. I'll be back in 1 second.
So, of course, Jed Bartlett from the West Wing. My seniors, we watch a bunch of West Wing episodes. One of my, if not my most favorite television show of all time. Let Bartlett be Bartlett. But Jason's going to be back. I remember Jason and Kevin Brown, who's also gone on to do wonderful things in his broadcasting career, when they were working together for the Syracuse Chiefs. One year they watched the entire series when they were on the road from start to finish, right? I think I got that right, Jason. I remember you and Kevin watched the whole series one year when you were calling game for the Chiefs.
We did. And Kevin, for my birthday a couple years ago, bought me this mug.
Nice. Bartlett for America. Outstanding.
So what's next?
What's next? That's a great place to wrap things up. What's next? And hopefully some good news. Thanks, Jason. I appreciate it. Thanks so much for the time. And I hope I see you calling White Sox games sooner rather than later.
I just hope I see you in person sooner rather than later.
That would be awesome.
Thanks, Brendan. Always a pleasure.
All right. Awesome. Thanks, Jason.